The transmission came at 3 in the morning, cutting through every communication channel humanity possessed. It reached the orbital stations first, then the lunar colonies, then the settlements on Mars and the mining outposts scattered across the asteroid belt. By the time the sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean on Earth, every human being in the solar system had seen the face of Supreme Commander of the Dominion. Admiral Cole was reviewing supply reports in her quarters aboard the orbital command station Meridian when her door slid open without warning. Her aide, a young officer named, stood in the doorway with a face so pale that thought he might be ill. "Admiral, we have received a transmission from an alien civilization," said. "They are demanding our surrender." Set down her coffee and followed him to the command center. The room was already crowded with officers and technicians, all of them staring at the main display screen where the alien commander's message played on repeat. Was tall and angular, his body covered in scales that seemed to be made of living crystal. His eyes were dark pools that reflected no light, and when he spoke, his voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never been told no. "Humans of Sol," the recording said, "your expansion into the Outer Rim territories has been deemed a violation of Dominion sovereignty. You are given 60 standard rotations to surrender all colonial assets, dismantle your military forces, and submit to integration protocols. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your species. This is not negotiation. This is your only warning." The message ended and the room fell silent. Could feel the fear radiating from her crew. They had always known that other civilizations existed out there in the darkness between stars. They had found evidence of them on ancient worlds, in abandoned structures and forgotten artifacts, but they had never made contact. They had never spoken to another intelligent species. Now one had found them, and it wanted them dead or enslaved. Watched the recording play again. She studied the alien commander's posture, the way he held himself, the absolute confidence in his voice. She had seen that confidence before. She had seen it in the faces of generals and admirals throughout human history, men and women who believed so completely in their own superiority that they could not imagine defeat. She started to laugh. The sound was so unexpected that every person in the command center turned to stare at her, looked genuinely worried, as though he thought the stress had finally broken his commanding officer, but could not stop herself. The laughter came from somewhere deep inside her, a place that remembered every history lesson she had ever learned, every war story she had ever heard, every account of human stubbornness and savagery and refusal to surrender. "Admiral," asked carefully. "Get me a secure line to Luna Command," said, still chuckling. "I need to speak with General Grant, and wake up Colonel Park on Mars. Tell him to stop whatever he is doing and get to a communication terminal. Oh, and find Admiral Sam. I think he is supposed to be on leave somewhere in the Jupiter system." "Admiral, with respect, this seems like a serious situation. The Dominion is an empire that spans 3 galactic arms. Our intelligence suggests they have conquered over 200 species. Their fleet numbers in the tens of thousands." Wiped her eyes and took a deep breath to steady herself. "I know exactly how serious this is. That is precisely why I need to speak with the others. We have been waiting for this day for a very long time." The young officer clearly did not understand, but he followed his orders. Within an hour, was looking at 3 familiar faces on her communication display. Grant was in his 70s now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp and alert. Park was younger, barely 40, but he had proven himself in the colonial conflicts that had tested humanity's ability to govern itself across multiple worlds. Sam looked annoyed at having his vacation interrupted, but that annoyance faded quickly when he saw the expressions on the other faces. "So it finally happened," said. "Someone out there finally decided we looked like easy prey." "The Dominion," confirmed. "They gave us 60 days to surrender or face extinction." Leaned forward in his chair. "What do we know about them?" "They are old, very old. Their empire predates human civilization by at least 50,000 years. They have never lost a war. They have never met a species they could not conquer. Their technology is beyond anything we have developed, and their numbers are so vast that we cannot even estimate their full military strength. Sam scratched his chin thoughtfully. And they expect us to just roll over and show our bellies. They do. Every other species in their path has done exactly that. They have no frame of reference for anything else. Grant began to laugh. It was the same laugh that had produced in the command center, deep and genuine, and filled with something that an outside observer might have mistaken for madness. Joined him a moment later, shaking his head in disbelief. Sam chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "They picked the wrong species," Sam said. "They really did," agreed. "Do they know anything about us?" asked. "Have they studied our history?" "I doubt it. Why would they? We are just another primitive civilization to them, another species to add to their collection. They probably did not even bother to look beyond our population numbers and our technology level." Laughter faded into a predatory smile. "Then they are in for quite a surprise." Nodded. "I want to convene the full military council within 48 hours. Every flag officer, every strategic planner, every specialist we have. We are going to give the Dominion an education in what happens when you threaten humanity." "What about the civilian government?" asked. "They will do what civilian governments always do. They will panic, they will argue, they will try to negotiate. Let them. By the time they realize that negotiation is not possible, we will already have our plans in place." Sam grinned. "You know, I was getting bored with peace. Fishing is nice, but it does not really get the blood pumping." "You will have plenty of excitement soon enough," promised. "We all will." She ended the communication and turned to look out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, an ancient empire was preparing to destroy everything she loved. They were confident. They were powerful. They had never known defeat. But they had never fought humans. Smiled at the stars and whispered to herself, "You have no idea what you have started." The War Council met in a bunker buried deep beneath the surface of Luna. The facility had been constructed during the early days of space colonization, when humanity was still learning to fight itself among the stars. It had thick walls designed to survive nuclear strikes, communication systems that could reach every corner of the solar system, and a tactical display large enough to show the entire known galaxy. Admiral Cole stood at the head of the table, surrounded by the finest military minds humanity had ever produced. General Grant sat to her right, his weathered hands folded on the table in front of him. Colonel Park was reviewing data on a portable display, his eyes scanning numbers and projections with practiced efficiency. Admiral Sam had finally arrived from Jupiter, looking more alert now that the reality of the situation had sunk in. There were others as well. Rear Admiral Nancy, who had written the book on space combat tactics, General Young, whose ground forces had 3 separate colonial rebellions, Colonel, the youngest person ever to command and one of the most creative strategic thinkers in the fleet. They had all come because they understood what was at stake. "Let us begin with what we know," said. The tactical display came to life, showing a map of the galaxy with territory highlighted in red. The red covered an enormous swath of space, stretching across 3 spiral arms and encompassing thousands of star systems. Human territory was a tiny blue dot near the edge of one arm, so small that it was barely visible. "The Dominion has existed for approximately 50,000 years," continued. "In that time, they have conquered and absorbed over 200 intelligent species. Their military doctrine is based on overwhelming force. They do not negotiate, they do not compromise, and they have never lost a war." "What is their fleet strength?" Nancy asked. Conservative estimates put their active combat fleet at 12,000 capital ships. Support vessels number around 40,000. Ground forces are impossible to calculate precisely, but they control hundreds of billions of soldiers across their occupied territories. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed those numbers. Humanity's entire fleet consisted of fewer than 800 vessels, and most of those were patrol craft or light frigates designed for colonial security rather than full-scale war. "So we are outnumbered roughly 15 to 1 in ships alone," Young said, "and their technology is more advanced than ours." "Correct," said. "On paper, we have no chance of winning this war." Grant cleared his throat. On paper, the American colonies had no chance of defeating the British Empire. On paper, the Vietnamese farmers had no chance against the most powerful military in the world. On paper, the Finnish army had no chance of stopping the Soviet Union. "What are you suggesting?" asked. Smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. "I am suggesting that paper is worthless when it comes to predicting what humans will do when their survival is threatened." Nodded and changed the display to show a timeline of human military history. "They have made a critical error. They looked at our technology and our population and assumed they knew everything they needed to know about us. They did not bother to study our history. If they had, they would have learned something very important." "Which is?" Park asked. "Humans have spent our entire existence fighting each other. We have turned warfare into an art form. We have developed tactics and strategies that no other species in the galaxy has ever imagined, because no other species has ever needed them. To win their wars through superior numbers and technology. They have never faced an enemy that fights the way we fight." Sam leaned forward. "What exactly do you have in mind?" Pulled up a series of files on the display. "For the past 200 years, since we first discovered evidence of other civilizations in the galaxy, we have been preparing for this moment. Every major military installation has a contingency plan for alien invasion. Every ship in the fleet has been equipped with weapons and systems designed specifically for this scenario. Every officer in this room has trained for interstellar warfare." The other officers exchanged glances. Some of them had known about the contingency plans. Most had not realized how extensive they were. "We knew this day would come," continued. "We just did not know when or from whom. To think they are about to fight a primitive species that barely understands space travel. They are wrong. They are about to fight a species that has spent 2 centuries preparing to be underestimated." Nancy pulled up her own data on the display. They rely heavily on formation tactics. Their fleets move in predictable patterns designed to maximize their numerical advantage. They expect their enemies to meet them head-on and be crushed by superior firepower. "So we do not meet them head-on," said. "We use guerrilla tactics, hit and run, ambushes. We make them chase us, stretch their supply lines, and then we cut them to pieces." Young nodded. "Their ground forces will have the same weaknesses. They are used to overwhelming their enemies with numbers. They have never faced an entrenched human defensive position." "We also have weapons they do not know about," said. "Technologies we have developed in secret, specifically for this purpose. They are in for several very unpleasant surprises." Park finished his calculations and looked up. "We cannot win a war of attrition. Even with superior tactics, they can afford to lose ships faster than we can build them. We need to break their will to fight. We need to make them understand that conquering humanity will cost them more than it is worth." "Exactly," said. "We are not trying to destroy the Dominion. We are trying to convince them that we are not worth the trouble. We need to hurt them badly enough that they decide to look for easier prey." Smiled grimly. "Make them bleed. Make them pay for every inch of space they try to take. Show them that humans do not surrender, do not break, and do not stop fighting until the enemy is destroyed or gone." Looked around the table at the faces of her colleagues. She saw determination there and confidence in something else. She saw hunger. These were warriors who had spent their careers maintaining peace, training for a war they hoped would never come. Now it had arrived, and part of them was grateful for it. We have 60 days before their deadline said. That is not much time, but it is enough. I want every ship in the fleet ready for combat. I want every colony prepared for siege. I want every soldier, every pilot, every engineer ready to fight for their species. The Dominion has declared war on humanity. Let us show them why that was the worst mistake they have ever made. The council dispersed to begin their preparations. The machinery of human warfare, dormant for 2 centuries, began to stir. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Dominion waited, confident in their inevitable victory, completely unaware of what was coming for them. Supreme Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars drift past the viewport. He had conquered 17 species in his career. He had overseen the subjugation of dozens of worlds. He had never experienced doubt, because doubt was a weakness, and weakness had been bred out of the ruling class thousands of years ago. The humans would fall like all the others. It was simply a matter of time. His tactical advisor, a slender female named approached with a data tablet in her hands. Her scales were a pale blue, marking her as a member of the analytical caste, and her eyes held the calculating intelligence that made her invaluable for strategic planning. Supreme Commander, we have received a response from the human government. Turned from the viewport, have they accepted our terms? No, Supreme Commander. They have sent us a document. They say it is required reading before any military engagement with their species. Required reading, Scales rippled with irritation. What arrogance, what is this document? I hesitated, which was unusual for her. She was not prone to uncertainty. It appears to be a historical summary, Supreme Commander, a record of their military conflicts. Their conflicts with other species. No, their conflicts with each other. Took the tablet and began to read. The document was long and detailed, filled with names and dates and numbers that meant nothing to him at first. But as he continued reading, something cold began to form in his chest. It was not fear, because did not feel fear. It was something else, something he did not have a name for. The humans had been fighting each other since before they developed writing. They had turned violence into a science. They had created weapons specifically designed to kill as many of their own kind as possible, and they had used those weapons with enthusiasm and creativity that bordered on madness. The conflict they call World War II, said quietly. They killed 60 million of their own species in 6 years, not for territory, not for resources, for ideology, for beliefs. Continued reading. The humans had developed nuclear weapons, devices capable of destroying entire cities in an instant, and they had pointed them at each other for decades. They called it mutually assured destruction. They had accepted the possibility of ending their own civilization rather than surrender to each other. They are insane, said. There is more, Supreme Commander. Look at their tactical innovations. The document detailed something called trench warfare, where humans had dug into the ground and slaughtered each other by the millions over a few kilometers of mud. It described guerrilla tactics, where small groups of fighters had defeated armies many times their size through patience and brutality. It explained concepts like total war, where every aspect of a society was mobilized for destruction. No species in our records has ever developed these tactics, said. They have never needed to. When facing a superior force, other species surrender or flee. Humans do neither. They dig in and they fight until they are dead or their enemy is dead. Set down the tablet. This changes nothing. We have superior technology, superior numbers, and superior organization. Their primitive tactics cannot overcome those advantages. Perhaps, Supreme Commander, but there is one more thing. They included a personal message from their military commander. The main display screen flickered to life, showing the face of a human female. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold and steady. Supreme Commander, the recording began. Thank you for your ultimatum. We wanted to make sure you understood exactly what you have started before the shooting begins. You see, humanity has been at peace for 200 years. We have spent that time building, exploring, and creating. We had almost forgotten what we truly are. Almost. The human paused, and her smile widened slightly. You have reminded us. You have given us permission to be what we were always meant to be. Warriors, survivors, the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever produced. So I want to thank you, Commander, truly. You have done us a favor. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something almost intimate. We are going to enjoy this. The recording ended. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was silent. A spoke first. Supreme Commander, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. A diplomatic solution might be more efficient than military conquest. Reconsider. Scales flared with anger. We are the Dominion. We have conquered 200 species. We do not reconsider because some primitive apes send us threatening messages. Of course, Supreme Commander. I merely suggest that we proceed with caution. Perhaps a smaller initial force to test their defenses before committing our full strength. Considered this. It was not an unreasonable suggestion. The standard Dominion tactic was to overwhelm new species with a single massive assault, crushing all resistance before it could organize. But the human document had planted a seed of uncertainty in his mind, even if he refused to acknowledge it. Very well, he said. We will send the 3rd Patrol Fleet to engage their outer colonies. 200 ships should be more than sufficient to gauge their capabilities. Once we have assessed their defenses, we will proceed with the full invasion. A bowed her head in acknowledgement. As you command, Supreme Commander. As she turned to leave, called after her. I want a full analysis of that document. I want to know everything about how humans fight. Every tactic, every strategy, every weapon they have ever developed. It will be done, Supreme Commander. Turned back to the viewport and stared at the stars. The cold feeling in his chest had not gone away. For the first time in his long career, he found himself wondering if he had made a mistake. The humans were clearly insane. They fought without reason, without logic, without any regard for their own survival. They should have been easy to defeat, easier than most species. Madness was not an advantage in warfare. But as he stood there in the darkness of his bridge, Supreme Commander could not shake the feeling that he was missing something. Something important. Something that the humans knew and he did not. He pushed the feeling aside. The Dominion had never lost. The Dominion would not lose now. But deep in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that there was always a first time. The 3rd Patrol Fleet emerged from hyperspace near the colony world of New Bristol, 200 warships arranged in perfect formation. Their commander, Fleet Master L, surveyed the human system with the bored confidence of someone performing a routine task. His orders were simple: destroy any resistance, secure the colony, and report back to the Supreme Commander. The human presence in the system appeared minimal. Long-range sensors detected a small convoy of 12 cargo vessels near the planet, escorted by a single military cruiser. It was barely worth the attention of his fleet, but orders were orders. Signal the human vessels, L commanded. Inform them that they have one rotation to surrender. Any attempt to flee or resist will be met with immediate destruction. The message was sent. The response came faster than expected. Fleet Master, the human commander wishes to speak with you directly. L allowed himself a small gesture of amusement. Perhaps the human wanted to beg for mercy. That was always entertaining. Put them through. The display screen showed a human female in a military uniform. She appeared calm, almost relaxed, despite the overwhelming force arrayed against her. Her name tag identified her as Captain. Fleet Master, the human said, thank you for the warning. I need 5 minutes to consult with my convoy captains about surrender procedures. Would that be acceptable? L's amusement grew. You have 5 of your minutes, human. Use them wisely. The communication ended. L turned to his bridge crew with a gesture of contempt. They cannot even face their defeat with dignity. 5 minutes to discuss surrender. Pathetic. But something was happening in the human convoy. The cargo vessels were beginning to move, their trajectories scattering in different directions. L's tactical officer reported the movement with confusion. Fleet Master, the cargo ships are breaking formation. They appear to be fleeing in panic. Of course they are. Detach pursuit squadrons to intercept them. We cannot allow any to escape and warn the other colonies. The fleet responded with practiced precision. Groups of warships peeled away from the main formation, each one chasing a different fleeing cargo vessel. It was exactly the response that the humans had expected. Captain watched the tactical display aboard the cruiser Steadfast with grim satisfaction. They were doing exactly what she had predicted. They were breaking formation, spreading out, chasing targets that appeared to be fleeing in terror. They had no idea that the cargo vessels were not fleeing. They were hurting. All freighters, execute Phase 2 on my mark, said into her communication system. Engineering is the Lance ready. Ready and charged, Captain. 1 shot available. That is all we need. Watch the display as the ships spread further and further apart, each one focused on its individual target. The main body of the enemy fleet had reduced itself to less than half its original strength, with the rest scattered across millions of kilometers of space. Now said. The cargo vessels stopped their panicked flight simultaneously. Panels slid open on their hulls, revealing weapon systems that should not have been there. These were not ordinary freighters. They were Q-ships, disguised warships designed to look harmless until the moment they struck. But the real weapon was on the Steadfast. The gravity lance had been developed in secret over the past decade, built on theoretical physics that they had declared impossible. It created a localized singularity, a tiny artificial black hole that lasted for only a few seconds. That was more than enough. Targeted the center of the remaining formation and fired. Space itself seemed to twist and collapse. 78 warships, caught too close together, were pulled toward a point of infinite density. Their hulls crumpled like paper. Their reactors detonated in cascading explosions. In 3 seconds, almost half of the enemy fleet ceased to exist. The survivors were in chaos. Their formation was gone, their flagship destroyed, their chain of command shattered. They had never experienced anything like this. No species in the history of the Dominion had ever possessed such a weapon. The Q-ship struck while the enemy was still reeling. 12 vessels that had seemed like helpless cargo haulers now revealed themselves as heavily armed predators. They tore into the scattered pursuit squadrons with missiles and beam weapons, destroying ships that were still trying to understand what had happened. Captain guided the Steadfast into the heart of the chaos, her crew working with calm efficiency. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. They had run simulations, studied tactics, and prepared for the day when humanity would finally face an alien enemy. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, not a single vessel remained operational. The debris field stretched across thousands of kilometers, a graveyard of crystalline wreckage and frozen bodies. Surveyed the destruction with no joy. She had killed thousands of intelligent beings today. She had ended lives that would never be recovered, destroyed families that would never know what had happened to their loved ones. War was not something to celebrate. But war was also not something to lose. Damage report, she ordered. Minor damage to 3 freighters. No casualties, Captain. The convoy is intact. Nodded. Send a message to Luna Command. Tell them that the convoy has been delivered safely. Note that we experienced minor delays due to traffic. Her communications officer stared at her. Traffic, Captain. Traffic allowed herself a small smile. and then set course for the next waypoint. We have a schedule to keep. As the Steadfast and its convoy moved away from the battlefield, composed a longer report in her mind. They would send more ships. They would send larger fleets with heavier weapons and more experienced commanders. The war had only just begun, and humanity was still massively outnumbered. But today, 12 freighters and 1 cruiser had destroyed 200 enemy warships without losing a single vessel. Today, humanity had proven that numbers and technology were not the only factors in warfare. Today, the Dominion had learned that their new enemy fought differently than anything they had ever faced. And somewhere in the depths of space, Supreme Commander was about to receive news that would change everything he thought he knew about this war. Captain looked out at the stars and thought about her children back on Earth. She thought about the world they would inherit, the future they would build. She had just committed acts of terrible violence in their name, and she would do so again if necessary. That was what it meant to be human. That was what it meant to be a mother, a soldier, and a survivor. The galaxy was about to learn a very old lesson, one that humanity had learned long ago, in the mud and blood of 1,000 battlefields. Never corner something that is meaner than you. 6 months had passed since the declaration of war, and the Dominion was bleeding. Supreme Commander had sent fleet after fleet against the human colonies. Each time, his forces had been met with tactics they could not predict, weapons they could not counter, and a ferocity they could not match. The humans did not fight like any species the Dominion had ever encountered. They did not hold defensive lines or protect territory in predictable ways. They struck from nowhere, vanished into the void, and struck again before they could recover. 1,800 capital ships had been lost. Dozens of supply convoys had been ambushed and destroyed. 3 invasion forces had landed on human colony worlds, only to find themselves trapped in grinding wars of attrition that consumed soldiers by the thousands without gaining any meaningful ground. The humans had lost ships too, 47 vessels destroyed, crews killed or captured. But for every human ship that fell, the lost dozens. The exchange rate was so unfavorable that even the vast resources of the Dominion could not sustain it indefinitely. Had requested a ceasefire. It was the first time in 50,000 years that a Supreme Commander had asked an enemy for peace. The meeting took place on a neutral station in unclaimed space, far from both human and territory. Brought a delegation of his finest officers, veterans of countless campaigns, all of them bearing the hollow expressions of soldiers who had witnessed something they could not explain. Admiral Cole arrived alone. She was still smiling. The conference room was bare and functional, designed for diplomacy rather than comfort. Sat on one side of the table with his officers arrayed behind him. Sat on the other side, hands folded in front of her, seemingly unconcerned by the fact that she was surrounded by beings who wanted her dead. "I do not understand," said. His voice was tired, drained of the confidence he had possessed 6 months ago. "Your species is young. Your technology is inferior to ours. Your numbers are insignificant. How is this possible?" Considered the question carefully before responding. "May I tell you a story, Commander?" Gestured for her to continue. He had come here seeking answers, and he was willing to listen to anything that might help him understand what had happened. "When humans first began exploring the stars, we were terrified," said. "We knew we were small and weak compared to what might be waiting for us out there. We found evidence of civilizations like yours, ancient and powerful beyond our comprehension. We knew that eventually someone would notice us. Someone would decide that we were worth conquering." She leaned back in her chair. "So we prepared. Not just with weapons, though we built plenty of those. We prepared by studying every war in our history, every battle we had ever fought against each other. Every strategy, every tactic, every dirty trick our species had ever invented. And then we spent 200 years improving on them." Scales shifted uneasily. "You expected this war." We did not know who would come for us or when, but we knew someone would. That certainty shaped everything we did. Every human child learns military history before they learn mathematics. Every adult maintains basic combat readiness. Our entire civilization has been preparing for an existential threat since we left our home planet. But why? One of the officers asked. Why would you spend centuries preparing for a war that might never come? Looked at him with something that might have been pity. Because that is what humans do. We prepare for the worst. We plan for disaster. We assume that the universe is hostile and that survival must be earned through strength and vigilance. It is not pessimism. It is realism born from millions of years of evolution on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. She turned back to, "You asked how we defeated your fleets despite being outnumbered, and the answer is simple. We have been fighting wars longer than your species has existed. We have developed and refined the art of warfare to a degree that no other civilization in the galaxy can match. You fight wars to conquer. We fight wars to survive. Those are very different things." Absorbed her words in silence. Around him, his officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected the humans to negotiate from weakness, to seek favorable terms in exchange for ending their resistance. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that seemed completely at ease with the situation. "You laughed when we declared war," said slowly. "I have watched that recording many times. You and your generals laughed. Why?" Smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. "We laughed because we were relieved, Commander. For 200 years, humanity has been holding its breath, waiting for the enemy that would finally force us to reveal what we truly are. You gave us that enemy. You gave us permission to stop pretending. Pretending. Pretending to be peaceful. Pretending to be civilized. Pretending that we had evolved beyond our violent nature." Stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "Humans are not a peaceful species, Commander. We have the capacity for peace, and we value it highly. But beneath the surface, we are still the same creatures who clawed our way to the top of the food chain on our world by being more brutal and more cunning than everything else." She turned back to face him. "The Dominion is powerful. You have conquered 200 species through superior force, but you have never faced a species that enjoys fighting the way we do. You have never faced a species that treats war as an art form, a science, and a game all at once. You declared war on humanity expecting us to be like all the others. We are not." Rose from his seat. "What are your terms?" "Simple ones. We do not want your territory or your resources. We do not want revenge or tribute. We want only one thing from you, Commander." "Name it." "Tell the others." Moved closer to him, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Tell every empire, every dominion, every species that thinks humanity might be easy prey. Tell them what happened here. Tell them what we did to your fleets. Tell them what we are." She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. "Tell them that humanity is always watching, always ready, and if anyone else decides to test us, we will be happy to demonstrate again." Looked at her hand for a long moment. In his culture, physical contact with an enemy was a sign of submission, but he had already submitted in every way that mattered. His fleet was decimated. His reputation was destroyed. His only hope now was to salvage what remained and ensure that the Dominion never made this mistake again. He reached out and took her hand. "You are a terrifying species," he said quietly. Smile returned. "Thank you, Commander. We have worked very hard to be exactly that." She released his hand and turned toward the door. "Safe travels back to your territory. I hope we never have to meet like this again." As she left, remained standing in the empty conference room, surrounded by officers who had no words for what they had experienced. The war was over. The Dominion had lost. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, the humans were returning to their small corner of the galaxy, satisfied that they had proven their point. They had proven that they were not prey. They were not victims. They were not a species to be conquered or absorbed. They were humans, and they were always ready for a fight. Stared at the door through which Cole had departed and made a silent vow. He would tell the others, just as she had asked. He would warn every civilization in the Dominion's sphere of influence. He would make sure that no one else made the same mistake he had made. Because now he understood why the human generals had laughed. They had not been laughing at They had been laughing because, after centuries of waiting, they finally had an excuse to show the galaxy what they really were. And the galaxy would never forget.